Sharing flow, I think a few of you did this with one of the ones earlier. We can go and say, it's my flow until I choose to share it. So if you choose to share a flow, it promotes it from being a my flow to being team flow. Yeah, so it's then shared between all of the people that you invite. So you can go and add other users, and they can be users as a group or as individual users as owners. You also have the possibility to make SharePoint an owner of that flow. In that case, the SharePoint site looks to its owners group. So if you make a SharePoint library-based flow, you could go and say, make this flow owned by that SharePoint site where the flow's running. In that case, anybody that's an owner on that SharePoint site also becomes an owner on the flow. So it's not owned by SharePoint Online as a running thing, it's owned by SharePoint, and SharePoint passes the ownership on to any owners of that SharePoint site. Yeah, so that's a nice way to actually go and say, okay, so it's a flow attached to this SharePoint site, so the whole thing should be managed as one unit. The flow and the data need to be managed by the owners of that SharePoint site. Yeah. So yes, you can add users and groups, but you can also add SharePoint as an owner for that flow. Yeah. If you add somebody as an owner, guess what? They're fully qualified as an owner of that flow. They could take you out of that flow as an owner. Yeah, so they become an equal owner to you. So that person can also add other people to the flow. So if we're adding another owner, that person is the same level that you are, and they can also add other owners later on. Yeah, so do be aware of that one. Okay, so we see the interface has changed slightly. It should be showing my flows and team flows, but it now seems to, in here, show it as shared flows. I think that should be shared flows at the top there, but you might see that as shared with me, and you'll see the things that are shared with you, as well as the things that you have shared. So you'll see the my flows, and then you'll also see shared with me over there. So that's the group flows, if you like. Okay, so we can share a flow. It's a good idea. It means you're not the only person who can update that flow if it needs changes made to it. The other way that we can work with our flows is to export and import flows. So we can go and export a flow if we need to move it or send it to another user. So if somebody else is dealing with a similar customer and they need a flow like that one you created last month, then you can export the flow and send it to that person. Yeah, they can then import it into their flows, and they're working on their own copy of your flow. Yeah, so export gives you a couple of ways of exporting that package. You can either export it as a zip or as a JSON logic apps templates, and then you can import it back into Power Automate, or you could take it into Azure and start proper coding with that flow as a start point. So if you need to go beyond what we've been able to do in Power Automate, you can export that as a JSON package and take it and import it into Azure Logic Apps. Yeah, so that gives you your step up to a coding environment to continue doing a flow, but doing it from Azure in a proper development environment. So you've got developer capabilities, you've got compile and run, you can do all of that in Azure Logic Apps. So it's the next step on from where we are. So usually, if we're exporting to share with other people or to migrate from our own trial tenancy into the customer's environment, we'll probably be doing that with a zip package. Yeah, is that how everybody's used the export so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing it as a zip package. You can even email that zip package to people. So
yeah.
Anybody can grab that zip package and go and import it into their own Power Automate environment. Yeah. Okay. So what about the administration side for Power Automate? We've got, with our tenancy, the ability to have a look at the administration side from that Power Automate admin screen. So if you go to the admin center at the top there, we get to see the environments, we get to see resources, get to see data integration, we've got data policies, we've got access to other admin centers at the bottom there. So we can do quite a lot, but this is the Power Platform Admin Center. It's not just about Power Automate. So although the analysis and analytics there mentions Power Automate, it also mentions Power Apps. So it's the whole of the Power Platform kind of admin area. On my home here, it also shows me environments. So this is our way that we went to go and add a new environment right at the beginning. So if we've got one of those Power Platform trials, we can go and work with both environments as well as the default environment that we normally see. So where am I? Here, environments default, but I've also got my practice one. Yeah. So I can see all of the environments on my tenancy. If, as an administrator, I go across here, so I can go and see that, yeah, there are various practice environments here, as well as that training default one. Yeah, so we've got various trial ones set up from the individual users. Each of those trials could have separate data inside them. Yeah. So the environments can be used to give you isolation so that you've got your data and your flows separate from other people's data and other people's flows. And your environment types can include trial one, the default one, which is what the tenancy is going to offer you to start with. But you can also create a production environment. Specifically, you can create a developer environment specifically. Yeah. Each of those environments have their own Dataverse database, and each of those environments could have Power BI reports, Power Automate flows, Power App apps inside there. Once you've got an environment, you can also group those things. So you can group your flow with your Power App, with your Power BI reports to go with it. So the environment gives you the chance to group those into a solution. So we've got an environment, we could save things into that environment. There will be one of those environments that's the default, and if you don't change at the top of your screen when you're creating your flows, then things end up going into that default environment. Yeah. So they become visible and shareable by everybody, But if you want to have your stuff in a separate place, you go and switch to your own trial environment, and then you've got things separated out and just there inside that non-production, non-shared environment. It's just your own environment separated from everything. So an environment has its own Dataverse database. It has its own set of Power Automate flows. It has its own Power Apps and Power BI reports that are stored within that environment as well. If you're using environments within your long-term development space, you'll probably end up taking some of your test flows and making them live. So you'll probably be exporting them from your Ruth practice, in my case, environment, and importing them into your default training environment. Yeah, so when you've got them working and they're all nicely set up and tested, you can export it from your practice environment and import it into your default environment. So you've got that separation of, oh, I'm just testing and fixing it over in your trial or your testing environment, and your users are actually using it over in your live environment, or your default environment. Yeah. So we've got those separation pieces that we can do. Okay. So final piece. Sometimes with our tenancy, we might have some very confidential or proprietary data in our tenancy. And there are certainly organizations out there where they are going to get very paranoid if people are able to use something like Power Automate to send data to some of these external facing apps like Twitter or LinkedIn or MailChimp or whatever. So when you're discussing with an organization that has some patents or some highly confidential data, you might want to have that discussion with who is allowed to write Power Automate flows and what apps they're allowed to integrate into that flow. So if they're touching confidential data, it might be that you allow them to automate that confidential data, but you don't allow them to share it with other apps like Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. If you want to put those security boundaries in place, then that's a data policy. And there are data policies that we can do for the whole tenancy, but there are also data policies that we can put together just for our Power Automate and Power Platform environment. So from the Power Platform admin environment, you have a section on policies down at the bottom there. Yeah. And in that policies area, it's got some data policies. And to start with, there are no policies in place that restrict what your Power Automate can automate. So what connections your Power Automate can include. So if you're working with SharePoint data, can it also talk to Dynamic CRM? Can it also talk to Salesforce? Maybe that's fine. Maybe those set of 3 things are what you want to automate and send data between.